The shadow of El Mencho. The Invisible King. In the rugged highlands of western Mexico, beyond the reach of most government patrols, lies a region that has quietly shaped one of the most powerful criminal empires in modern history. This is the birthplace of a man the United States government has described as one of the most dangerous drug traffickers in the world. His name is Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. But across Mexico, and far beyond its borders, he is known by another name. El Mencho. A figure who rarely appears in public, who avoids cameras, and whose voice is almost never heard. Yet despite his near-total absence from public view, his influence has spread across continents. From the streets of Jalisco to cities across the United States, Europe, and Asia, the organization he leads, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, has grown into one of the most powerful and aggressive criminal groups in the world. His rise did not happen overnight. It was built slowly, strategically, and often violently. But much about his life remains unclear. Even today, key details about his early years are not publicly documented, and some accounts remain disputed. What is known, however, paints the picture of a man who transformed from a rural upbringing into the head of a global narcotics empire. And his story begins far from the headlines. Roots in rural Jalisco. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was born on July 17, 1966, in a rural area of Jalisco, Mexico. He was raised in a region known both for its agricultural traditions and its long-standing connection to drug trafficking routes. His family was large, reportedly one of several siblings, and like many in the area, they lived a modest life. Public records suggest that his early environment was shaped by economic hardship and limited opportunity. At the time, parts of Jalisco were already linked to organized crime networks, particularly those involved in marijuana and opium production. However, details about El Mencho's childhood remain limited. There are no confirmed records of his education level, and very little verified information exists about his life as a teenager. Some reports suggest he may have migrated to the United States at a young age, possibly in search of work. But the exact timeline, and the circumstances surrounding that move, are not fully documented. What is clear is that by the 1980s, he had entered a world that would define the rest of his life. Time in the United States. By the mid-1980s, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was living in the United States, reportedly in California. It was during this period that he first encountered the U.S. criminal justice system. In 1986, he was arrested in the San Francisco Bay Area on drug-related charges. Court records indicate that he was involved in heroin trafficking. He was later convicted and served time in a U.S. federal prison. After completing his sentence, he was deported back to Mexico in the early 1990s. This chapter of his life is one of the few parts supported by official documentation. But what remains unclear is how influential this period was in shaping his future role in organized crime. Some analysts suggest that his time in the United States may have exposed him to larger trafficking networks. Others caution that there is limited evidence to support how directly these experiences contributed to his later rise. What is certain is that after returning to Mexico, he would re-enter a country where the drug trade was rapidly evolving, and becoming increasingly violent. Entering the cartel world. After returning to Mexico, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes began his ascent within organized crime. He is believed to have joined the Mencho Cartel, a criminal organization that operated primarily in western Mexico. The cartel was led by the Valencia family and had established connections to larger trafficking networks, including those tied to the Sinaloa cartel. Within the Mencho Cartel, El Mencho reportedly started at a lower level. Some reports suggest he worked as an enforcer, responsible for protecting operations and maintaining control in contested areas. However, precise details about his role during these early years are limited. What is documented is that the Mexican drug trade during this period was undergoing a major transformation. Cartels were becoming more organized, more militarized, and more competitive. Violence was increasing, and alliances were constantly shifting. In this environment, individuals who could demonstrate loyalty, discipline, and strategic thinking had opportunities to rise quickly. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, El Mencho had begun to establish himself within the organization. And soon, events beyond his control would create an opportunity that would change everything. The power vacuum. In the early 2000s, Mexican authorities intensified their efforts against major drug trafficking organizations. Leaders of the Mencho Cartel were arrested or killed in a series of operations. These disruptions created a power vacuum within the organization. With key figures removed, internal divisions began to emerge. Different factions competed for control, and the stability of the cartel weakened. It was during this period that Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes began to consolidate power. He aligned himself with certain factions while distancing himself from others. And as the Mencho Cartel fractured, a new group began to take shape. A group that would eventually become known as the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. But its rise would not go unnoticed. And it would not come without conflict. A new cartel emerges. Around 2010, following the fragmentation of the Mencho Cartel, a new organization began to emerge in the state of Jalisco. This group would later be identified as the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, often referred to as CJNG. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes is widely recognized by authorities as its leader. Unlike some older cartels that operated with a lower profile, CJNG quickly gained attention for its rapid expansion and willingness to confront both rival groups and government forces. The cartel's early operations focused on establishing control over key territories and trafficking routes. But it also began to demonstrate a level of organization and coordination that set it apart. Videos circulated online. Some showing heavily armed individuals identifying themselves as members of the group. These displays were interpreted by analysts as attempts to project strength and influence. However, the extent to which these videos represented the full structure of the organization is not always clear. What is confirmed is that within a few years, CJNG had grown into one of Mexico's most powerful criminal organizations. And at the center of it all was a man who remained almost entirely out of sight. The making of a power structure. Consolidating control. By the early 2010s, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, was no longer an emerging faction. It was becoming a dominant force. Authorities in Mexico and the United States began to observe a pattern: rapid territorial expansion combined with highly coordinated operations. Unlike some older cartels that relied heavily on loose alliances, CJNG appeared to function with a more centralized command structure. And at the top of that structure, according to multiple government agencies, was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho. However, the exact internal hierarchy of CJNG is not fully documented. Much of what is known comes from law enforcement intelligence, arrests of lower-level members, and court filings. These sources suggest that El Mencho maintained strict operational control, while delegating responsibilities to trusted associates and family members. This structure allowed the organization to expand quickly while maintaining discipline. At the same time, CJNG was building something else. A reputation. The role of family networks. One of the defining features of CJNG's leadership structure is the reported involvement of family members. Investigations by U.S. and Mexican authorities have identified several relatives of El Mencho as key figures within the organization. Among them is his wife, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia. She has been linked by authorities to financial operations associated with the cartel. According to official reports, she is believed to have played a role in managing assets and maintaining the organization's economic infrastructure. However, her legal cases have involved complex proceedings, and not all allegations have resulted in final convictions. Her brother, Abigail Gonzalez Valencia, was identified by authorities as a leader of a group known as Los Queenies, which has been described as closely connected to CJNG. Los Queenies has been characterized in reports as a financial arm of the organization, allegedly responsible for money laundering and international transactions. Again, While these connections are widely reported by government agencies, the full scope of their operations is not publicly documented in detail. What is clear is that CJNG's structure extended beyond traditional cartel models. It combined operational strength with financial sophistication. And that combination would prove critical to its growth. Expansion beyond Jalisco. Within a few years of its formation, CJNG began expanding far beyond its original base. By the mid-2010s, authorities reported the group's presence in multiple Mexican states. This expansion was not random. It appeared to follow key trafficking corridors, routes used to move narcotics toward the U.S. border and international ports. In several regions, CJNG entered into direct conflict with rival organizations. These conflicts often involved battles for territorial control. However, the specific details of many of these confrontations are difficult to verify independently, as they often occur in areas with limited media access. What is confirmed is that CJNG's growth was rapid. In some assessments, it was described as one of the fastest expanding cartels in Mexico. By this point, El Mencho had become a high-priority target for both Mexican and U.S. authorities. But despite increasing pressure, he remained elusive. International operations. As CJNG expanded within Mexico, it also began strengthening its international operations. According to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the cartel developed networks that extended into multiple countries. These networks were used to traffic various substances, including methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, and fentanyl. Authorities have reported that CJNG established distribution channels in the United States, as well as connections in Europe and Asia. However, the exact scale of these operations is difficult to measure. Much of the available data comes from seizures, arrests, and intelligence estimates. What is known is that CJNG became a significant player in the global drug trade. Its ability to produce, transport, and distribute narcotics at scale placed it among the most influential criminal organizations in the world. And at the center of it all remained a figure rarely seen, but increasingly recognized. The rise of fentanyl. In recent years, one substance has come to define the modern drug trade more than any other: fentanyl. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, significantly more potent than heroin. Its production does not rely on large agricultural operations, making it easier to manufacture in smaller, concealed environments. According to U.S. authorities, CJNG has been heavily involved in the production and distribution of fentanyl. The DEA has identified the cartel as one of the primary organizations responsible for supplying fentanyl to the United States. However, it is important to note that the global fentanyl trade involves multiple actors, including other criminal organizations. The extent of CJNG's dominance in this space continues to be analyzed. What is clear is that fentanyl has dramatically increased the stakes. And it has brought unprecedented attention to groups like CJNG. And to leaders like El Mencho. A target of global authorities. As CJNG's influence grew, so did the international response. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was officially designated by the U.S. government as a major foreign narcotics trafficker. The U.S. Department of State announced a multi-million-dollar reward for information leading to his capture. He was also indicted in multiple federal cases in the United States. Despite these efforts, El Mencho has remained at large. His ability to avoid capture has raised questions among analysts and investigators. Some suggest that his operational discipline and security measures have contributed to his continued evasion. Others note that the challenges of locating individuals in remote or controlled territories make such operations extremely difficult. What is publicly known is limited. And much about his current location and movements remains undisclosed. The culture of fear and control. In regions where CJNG operates, reports have described an environment shaped by control and influence. Local populations, in some cases, have been caught between rival groups and law enforcement operations. However, detailed, independently verified accounts from these areas can be limited. Journalists and researchers often face significant risks when reporting from regions affected by organized crime. As a result, some aspects of CJNG's local impact remain difficult to fully document. What is known is that the cartel has established a strong presence in multiple areas. And that presence has had lasting effects on communities, economies, and security conditions. Power, violence, and global recognition. A cartel that defied tradition. By the mid-2010s, analysts began to recognize something different about the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. CJNG did not follow the traditional pattern of older cartels. Where some groups relied on secrecy and minimal visibility, CJNG appeared willing, at times, to openly display its strength. This included the circulation of online videos showing armed individuals identifying themselves as members of the cartel. These displays were interpreted by authorities and researchers as a form of psychological messaging, intended to project power and deter rivals. However, it is important to note that not all such videos can be independently verified, and their full context is not always publicly known. What is confirmed is that CJNG's approach combined rapid expansion, operational coordination, and a willingness to engage in direct confrontation. This combination made it one of the most closely monitored criminal organizations in the world. The 2015 helicopter incident. On May 1, 2015, a coordinated series of attacks occurred across the state of Jalisco. Mexican authorities reported road blockades, arson incidents, and armed confrontations in multiple locations. During these events, a Mexican military helicopter was brought down. According to official government statements, the aircraft was hit during an operation targeting cartel members. Several military personnel were killed. Authorities attributed the attacks to CJNG. This incident marked a significant escalation. It demonstrated a level of organization and capability that drew national and international attention. However, some details surrounding the exact sequence of events remain based on official reports and have not been independently verified in full. What is clear is that the incident became a defining moment in the perception of CJNG's operational capacity. Expansion into strategic territories. As CJNG expanded, its presence was increasingly noted in regions considered critical to trafficking operations. These included border states and areas with access to major ports. Control over such regions allows criminal organizations to move goods more efficiently across international boundaries. According to U.S. and Mexican authorities, CJNG sought influence in multiple strategic locations. This expansion often brought the cartel into conflict with other groups already operating in those areas. The result was a complex and shifting landscape of alliances and rivalries. However, due to the nature of these conflicts, comprehensive, independently verified accounts are limited. Much of what is known comes from law enforcement assessments and investigative reporting. Still, these sources consistently indicate that CJNG became a dominant force in several key regions. Financial networks and money flow. Behind the visible operations of trafficking lies another critical component. Finance. For an organization like CJNG, managing revenue is as important as generating it. U.S. Treasury investigations have identified multiple entities and individuals allegedly linked to CJNG's financial operations. These include businesses that authorities believe were used to move or conceal funds. Such operations often involve complex international networks. However, the exact mechanisms used in each case are not always publicly disclosed. Legal proceedings related to financial investigations can take years, and details may remain sealed or incomplete. What is clear is that CJNG has been described by authorities as having a sophisticated financial infrastructure. This infrastructure has enabled it to sustain operations across multiple regions. The elusive leader. Despite years of investigation, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes remains one of the most elusive figures in organized crime. There are very few confirmed photographs of him. Public appearances are virtually non-existent. Audio recordings, if they exist, have not been widely verified. His ability to remain hidden has contributed to his reputation. Some analysts suggest that he relies on a network of trusted individuals and strict communication protocols. Others point out that the geography of certain regions provides natural protection. However, these assessments are based on analysis and are not fully documented in public records. What is known is that multiple operations have been launched to locate him. And yet, as of now, he has not been captured. Designated a global threat. As CJNG's influence expanded, so did its recognition on the global stage. The organization has been identified by U.S. authorities as a major transnational criminal organization. Mencho himself has been named in multiple indictments. He has also been placed on sanctions lists, restricting financial interactions with entities under U.S. jurisdiction. These designations are part of broader efforts to disrupt criminal networks through financial and legal means. However, the effectiveness of such measures varies. While they can limit certain operations, they do not always lead directly to arrests. Still, these actions reflect the level of concern among international authorities. CJNG is no longer viewed as a regional organization. It is considered a global actor. Impact on communities. The rise of CJNG has had significant consequences for communities in affected regions. Reports from journalists, researchers, and human rights organizations describe complex social and economic impacts. These can include displacement, economic disruption, and increased security concerns. However, it is important to approach these reports with caution. Access to affected areas is often limited, and data collection can be challenging. As a result, some aspects of CJNG's impact remain difficult to quantify. What is clear is that the presence of organized crime influences daily life in multiple ways. And those effects extend beyond borders. If you made it this far, you've just seen how one man rose from obscurity to become one of the most powerful figures in organized crime, based on what's publicly known, documented, and investigated. If you want more deep, factual stories like this, make sure you subscribe to Beyond the Bars and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. Drop your thoughts below. What story should we cover next? Stay informed. Stay aware. And we'll see you in the next one.